morning, Bucknutters. Welcome into the Bucknuts Morning 5 here on Monday, April 4th, 2016. I am Dave Biddle, joined by the People's Champ, Matt Baxendell. Bax, a couple of freshmen, true freshmen, have been very impressive so far for Ohio State during spring ball. Even more impressive, I think, anybody expected. Those two being Michael Jordan and Antonio Williams. I was pretty high on Antonio Williams, this kid that was originally committed to Wisconsin. I loved his film. I felt like Ohio State, was not getting the raw end of the deal at all when Kareem Walker decommitted and the Buckeyes landed Antonio Williams. But it's good to see him really stepping up this spring. He's a guy that should be getting ready for his high school prom. Same deal with Michael Jordan, but this is a guy that I did not expect to be this good this fast. This is a kid that takes longer for offensive linemen. He definitely has the frame, and he has the toughness. This kid looks a lot better than certainly what I expected. Now, he was a four-star prospect from Michigan, but talk about these two guys, Antonio Williams and Michael Jordan. They've been extremely impressive so far, Bax.
Yeah, I agree with you completely, and let's talk about Michael Jordan first. How awesome is it that Ohio State stole this kid out from under a rival's nose, and he appears like he could start as a true freshman? Talk about, just rubbing Jim Harbaugh's nose in the fact that they don't have a lot of good recruits in the state of Michigan, and we took one of them right there and there. I think Michael Jordan's almost more of the story, though, and that's why I mentioned him first, because it is incredibly difficult for a true freshman offensive lineman to potentially work his way onto the field right away. Much less one from a state like Michigan, which doesn't have the best high school football. So it's not like that Michael Jordan was playing against the most elite competition week in, week out in high school. Look at Shane Morris in high school. And everybody talked about how great he was, and then when he came to play Ohio teams, they lost by 6 touchdowns every game. Michigan high school football, in a word, stinks. And Michael Jordan's overcoming the fact that he played average high school football teams and is suddenly fighting to be on the field as one of the starting guards this year. That's incredibly impressive. As for Antonio Williams, let's just say that this is starting to look again like a Zeke versus Derek Green redux, if you will. For those of you who don't remember, which is very few, I'm sure, Ohio State was very heavy into Derek Green about 4 years ago in recruiting, and then they ended up going with some kid named Ezekiel Elliott, and Derek Green ended up at that school up north instead. I know which one I wanted out of this, and I know which one was lower rated at the time, and it was actually Zeke. So Antonio Williams right now is really making a major impact in terms of opening some minds about being the tailback in the future. I put it in the bucket on Sunday. While I don't necessarily think he's going to get a ton of playing time this year, he strikes me as like one of those freshman running backs. He's going to go out there and rush for 300 or so yards this year. He'll get a couple touchdowns over the course of the year, and we'll all be talking about how good he's going to be next year whenever he gets more of an opportunity to be part of the game. So, this is really these two true freshmen, early enrollees, are making a very big impact in spring football, and that's not something that I think a lot of us expected. And by the way, a third true freshman early enrollee who's making a very big impact is Austin Mack, so it tells you how good this recruiting class was already.
Right, Austin Mack, it's like he's almost like an afterthought, for lack of a better word, because we expected him to do this, and he's even exceeded expectations. So I'm glad you brought up Austin Mack. We don't want to forget about him just because he's established himself early, but I've just been blown away by Michael Jordan and Antonio Williams, just how impressive those guys have been. But no question, Austin Mack's going to be in the wide receiver rotation. Out there at the scrimmage on Saturday, Bax, he was just running with the first team. He just had first team and second team, that was it. If you were third team, you did not play. A lot of guys were rotating, but Austin Mack strictly with the first team. Johnny Dixon, strictly second team wide receiver. Torrance Gibson was doing a little rotating back and forth. Terry McLaurin, rotating back and forth, but we'll see what happens there. James Clark, that's another interesting one. James Clark was just running with the first team, kind of a forgotten man, had a good day at the scrimmage on Saturday, so good to see James Clark out there having a good day. Switching back to running backs real quick, Breonte Dunn continues to be the first team running back, although Mike Weber was also with the first team on Saturday. Those guys really seem bracketed. Let's cut through the BS. Who do you think is going to be the starting running back when the chips are down this fall?
I think by the time the season's halfway over, it's going to be Mike Weber. I think he just has a higher ceiling. But I will say this, in Breonte Dunn's defense, everybody keeps acting like, oh, yeah, Dunn's been here forever. He's not that good. I'm sure this is just a senior getting an opportunity, and Mike Weber's really going to pass him when the things matter. And let's not forget here, Breonte Dunn was a 5-star tailback in his own right. And who's the guys he sat behind the first 4 years of his career? 2 years of Carlos Hyde and 2 years of Ezekiel Elliott. That would sit a lot of really good players. So let's not act like Breonte Dunn isn't a very capable tailback in his own right here. The reason I think Mike Weber's going to end up being the guy, if Ohio State doesn't choose to go with kind of a 2-tailback system, which is completely possible, that it's simply because Mike Weber beat out Dunn last year. And Weber's, he's younger, fresher legs, all that other fun stuff. But it was because, as a true freshman last year, he already moved ahead of Dunn before his injury. So, I think this is a great situation for Ohio State, though. Remember when Urban Meyer got here and everybody said he couldn't have a 1,000-yard rusher, and he's had him 4 straight years? Well, let's think about it this way. Ohio State's never really had a tailback rotation. Even Zeke, when he was the backup to Carlos Hyde, what did he do? 200-300 yards, a couple touches here and there. They didn't give Hyde the ball enough. So I think this may be the first time in the Meyer era you see more of a shared load at tailback compared to other years. And let's not forget either, Curtis Samuel is going to touch the ball in some way, shape, or form. And I'm not sure how they're going to get it to him necessarily, but I do think he's going to be in the mix to get the touches at tailback too.
Just a small correction, my friend. 3 straight years with the tailback going over 1,000 yards because Carlos Hyde fell 30 yards short back in 2012, had 970 yards, and then was suspended the first 3 games of the next year and still had over 1,500 to finally become Urban Meyer's first 1,000-yard running back. And Urban Meyer hated answering those questions. He would get fire in his eyes when people would ask him about not having a 1,000-yard running back. And he would always, we had 1 year at Utah, we had 2 guys that almost did it. We had Florida, we had all different skill sets. He would always have these, and there were real excuses. I mean, he's not an excuse maker, but he would actually get mad. It just wouldn't be something he'd be blow off that would be like, yeah, it's not really a big deal, because people were using it against him in recruiting. So, yeah, that's definitely a question he doesn't get any longer. Hey, before I let you go, Troy Smith, I hate seeing this. Sometimes you see guys that get DUIs and they maybe were barely over the limit, look like they weren't really even impaired. Then there's the Troy Smith situation, got a DUI over the weekend in Westerville. I mean, he was messed up. He was telling the officer at first that he was an officer, and then the officer was like, "You're an officer?" He said, No, I'm not an officer. And he's slurring his words. He couldn't do the alphabet. I mean, I'm glad that the officer got him off the road, saved other people, saved Troy's life. I mean, but, I hate to see Troy that messed up behind the wheel. That's really, really disturbing, Bax.
Yeah, this is unfortunate, too, because I agree with you. I think there's a certain amount of nuance in our driving laws that sort of gets lost here. You blow a .079 and you're completely legal, and you blow a .8080 and you're exactly the same and you're driving perfectly fine, but you are legally drunk. And I think that's something a lot of people have had issues with. There's a lot of people who have been pulled over for being quote-unquote drunk, and they certainly weren't. But in Troy's case, that's the stereotype. That is the perfect image of what you don't want people doing driving. I mean, I'm sure Troy feels worse about this than anybody, but this is a horrible, horrible mistake. You cannot be driving on a road if you can't even talk. How are you able to drive? I mean, that's where you start talking about being a threat to other people's lives. That's just it. Everybody makes mistakes, and I don't want to kill Troy for it, but this is something that he's going to have to struggle with for a couple of years now before this kind of fades away, the stink of this, because not only was he pulled over for a DUI, but he was drunk. He was hammered. And in the day of Uber, there's really no excuse for it. So you have to hope if Troy needs help with so much shape or form, he gets it, because you hate to see a legend or anybody in that position. And, it's just, I think, disappointing is the only way to describe it. But it's also far more common among professionals and normal people than you'd expect to. I read somewhere like 1 in 20 people in the state of Ohio are going to end up with a DUI at some point in their life. And that same night that Troy Smith was pulled over, U.S. soccer star Abby Wambach was pulled over for a DUI. So, unfortunately, these things are more common than we realize, and you just hope that nobody gets hurt whenever something like that gets happened, because you hear too many stories about people dying in drunk driving accidents.
Great stuff, as always, from the People's Champ, Matt Baxendell. You can read his column every Sunday. The Bucket of Bulletin is still pinned to our front row message board. Make sure you check that out. Our Alex Gleitman has posted the video of Troy Smith's DUI arrest, so if you want to see that situation, you can get on Bucknuts and check that out. I hate to see Troy in that situation, but it is an interesting video, I will say that. Thanks again to Matt Baxendell. The Buckeyes will hit the practice field again tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, first hour of practice is open from 8:30 to 9:30, and then we will interview head coach Urban Meyer afterward around 11 a.m. So Steve Hellag and I will be there covering that. Look for wall-to-wall coverage on Bucknuts tomorrow. Thanks again to Matt Baxendell. Thanks to you, the listeners, for tuning into the show. I appreciate it. Hope you have a great day. Take it away, best damn band in the land.